Hello and welcome to The View from 22, a Spectator show in which we take another look at the week's news. And what else is there really to talk about this week other than Gary Lineker and his spat with the BBC? It has dominated the headlines for the last few days and seems to have been resolved today, on Monday, with the news that Gary Lineker has won, effectively. He is now allowed to tweet whatever he wants, about whatever he wants, and he will continue. He will go back to hosting Match of the Day, which he did not do on Saturday night. My name is Freddie Gray. I'm the Deputy Editor of The Spectator, and I'm joined now by Damien Riley, who is a Spectator online contributor and columnist. And Damien, you wrote an excellent piece over the weekend saying we're finding out, the headline was, we're finding out who runs the BBC. And I think the answer, it seems, is Gary Lineker and the people behind Gary Lineker, not the people who pay the licence fee or the Director General even, or Chairman of the BBC.
Well, that's exactly right, and I think it's why the whole thing blew up so fast. I think we, on the face of it, it was an issue about whether Gary Lineker could tweet politically or not, but I think it erupted into something much larger than that, which was a report on where we are in the culture war and who really runs the BBC, and whether it is the people who pay for it, which is the licence payers, and the management of the BBC, which is the Director General and the Chairman, or whether it is the so-called talent, and it turns out they are in charge.
Well, so let's talk about the leadership of the BBC, because obviously Boris Johnson tried to change the culture at the BBC. He brought in Tim Davie, Director General, or Tim Davie came in under his watch. He also was in charge of Richard Sharp becoming the chairman, and that's quite controversial because Richard Sharp, of course, gave him a loan, which does make his position fairly ridiculous. And what's noticeable is these two figures have been very quiet, and it seems they've caved. In fact, Gary Lineker thanked Davie today for being so supportive over the last few days. So they've backed down, essentially.
Well, for a while, it looked quite promising. So if you...
Promising, you mean, that's a very unneutral word.
Well, promising in terms of, it looked like, because for a long time people have been saying there is a big lack of impartiality at the BBC, particularly under the previous regime. And under Tim Davie, there does seem to have been an exodus of people who were doing a very bad job of disguising their political views and were unable to at least affect neutrality. And you've seen people like Emily Maitlis, John Sopel, Lewis Goodall, Nish Kumar, Andrew Marr, all departed. And so it looked as if the BBC was making a big play towards impartiality and making sure that people within the organisation at least publicly pretended to be impartial. But it seems with the Gary Lineker issue that all of that good work is completely lost now. A precedent has been set. From now on, anybody within the BBC who is told that tweet is a bit impartial, you seem to be making clear your politics online, can just point to the Gary Lineker precedent and say, sue me.
Well, let's talk about the free speech aspect of this debate, because it may be a little bit stale, but it's still been a major part of the conversation. I mean, why can't Gary Lineker have free speech on Twitter? Why do you think he, as a football presenter, can't air his views on the migrant crisis, on the Tories, whatever he wants?
I suppose there's several ways to answer that question. I think it's not that important that he is a sports presenter. I think he's a BBC employee, and therefore he is bound by the rule of impartiality that should bind all BBC employees. The first thing to say is that Gary Lineker is in a very privileged position. He has 8.8 million Twitter followers, and that is directly attributable to his position at the BBC. He has the plum job presenting Match of the Day. They say if you're going to talk about, the best way to, the best thing that can happen for ideas is they get put in the public sphere and people can debate them and they can live or die based on that. But Gary Lineker doesn't really do that. He just sort of lobs them on Twitter to his followers. He doesn't appear on Question Time and take part in debates about the things he believes. I suppose that doesn't really answer the question, why can't he do it? I think the broader point is that the BBC is distinguished from other news organisations throughout the world by its impartiality. And as soon as you lose that, it's lost forever. It will never be got back, and a precedent is set.
But would you, Damien Riley, as a few people have made this point, and I think it may have some validity, would you, Damien Riley, if, let's say I can out you as a pro-Brexit person now, if Gary Lineker had tweeted something along the lines of, great that the government's getting this situation under control with the boats. This is something we can do now that we've left the European Union. And there'd been a huge hoo-ha about that, and everybody on the left had said unacceptable for him. How would you feel about that? Would you say he'd breached his impartiality, do you think?
Yes, I would think he has breached his impartiality. I mean, it's very easy to say.
Yeah.
No, you wouldn't. You'd be out manning the barricades, defending him.
Yeah.
But no, it's wrong. They shouldn't. None of them. Also, I mean, the bare fact that they have huge audiences, and if you start airing political views, you're going to antagonise people. And also, he does know that. He's deliberately saying provocative things. So you can't act all surprised when people are provoked and get angry.
Do you think, a lot of Tories now, or right-wingers, are saying what this whole situation, what this whole crisis over the weekend has pointed towards, is that the taxpayer-funded model, the licence fee model of the BBC, is dysfunctional in the modern media environment. It doesn't work to have... You're never going to be able to keep everybody who's employed at the BBC or has a profile at the BBC. You're never going to be able to keep their views silent because of social media. Shall we just get rid of this pretense that it's a sort of semi-state body?
Yeah, so I don't follow that argument at all. I saw Jacob Rees-Mogg making it, and I think there are certain elements of the Tory party particularly which will always enjoy bashing the BBC and threatening it with the licence fee model. I don't also believe that you can't keep people quiet because of social media. I think there is a problem within the BBC of near uniformity of outlook. So they talk about inclusivity and diversity all the time, but I don't think there is diversity of thought. I think there's a great deal of diversity probably of skin colour and all the other types of diversity, but there's a sort of uniformity of outlook, and I think they should rectify that as quickly as possible. Let's
turn the conversation back towards Lineker, because that's what people really like talking about. And it seems to me a lot of people like talking about it because while he has a lot of fans, 8.8 million followers on Twitter, I'm not sure all of them like him, but certainly there seems to be a lot of people who are pro-Gary and his right to speak. He's also quite divisive. A lot of people, since Brexit particularly, where he's been very vocal about Brexit, he obviously thinks it's an awful thing, and he said quite a lot against it on Twitter. There's a large section of the public that supports Brexit or just finds it annoying when they're lectured about Brexit, that find him obnoxious and smug and irritating. And I would say I find him obnoxious and smug and irritating when he talks about football as well. I actually just don't find him particularly agreeable.
Smug, obnoxious, and
yeah. I mean, well, there was the Qatar speech he gave at the beginning of the World Cup at Qatar, and I know the BBC signed off on that, but I thought it was a ridiculous way to start the World Cup. And you could almost see in his eyes as he gave it, he was thinking about all the sort of retweets and likes he was getting. He's become one of those people who's been possibly further ruined by social media, and he's addicted to the likes and the retweets and the sense of validation he gets about his opinions, because there are a lot of people who will validate them. Do you think his bigger problem is that he's a divisive figure now, and that as the face of BBC Sport in many ways, not just the presenter of Match of the Day, he is unpopular?
No, I don't. I think we live in divided times. Everything is so polarised now, from Brexit to other parts of the culture, where everything has become so polarised, and that's why it's so stupid of him to get involved with these political tweets, because he's very obviously going to antagonise half of his audience. I think just talking about football, he's completely fine. He's sort of a few weak puns introducing football. It's not exactly rocket science. Somebody said to me, and I totally agree with it, that Mr. Blobby presenting Match of the Day would still draw the same audiences. People don't turn up to watch Gary Lineker. Yeah. They're turning up to watch the football, nicely edited. And that's not really... It's amazing that he gets paid 1.35 million quid to do that.
Did you watch Match of the Day on Saturday?
I watched a little bit of it, yeah, I saw it.
I mean, I watched it, and it seems to me it had a much higher audience, 2.58 million, probably a lot of people tuning in just out of curiosity to see what it would look like. But it was very boiled down to just the highlights. There was no theme tune, there was no analysis, there was no commentary. I do think probably it's a better show with some analysis. It doesn't necessarily have to be by Lineker.
No, far from it. But I guess that showed the power of the talent, that they managed to scare everybody away from the programme. So it was quite an astonishing show of power that Lineker, first of all, was withdrawn, and then I think Ian Wright and Alan Shearer said they wouldn't do it, and then all the commentators from the game said they wouldn't do it, and then some of the other pundits said they wouldn't step in, and then what I thought was really amazing was Piers Morgan tweeted, "Anyone thinking of doing this, we will see you and we will judge you," and I thought that was a real show of power. Like, there was no mucking around. That was like,
anyone thinking of doing this, as in getting involved in the...
Anyone thinking of presenting the show, he said, I think the exact words were, "We will see you and we will judge you."
Yeah.
I was like, okay.
Speaking of Gary Lineker's likeability, I thought his tweet this morning was particularly
amazing.
A particularly good example of the sort of divisiveness we're talking about. He said, after he'd sort of said that he was coming back on, he said, "A final thought." It wasn't actually his final thought, he had a few more. But a final thought, however difficult the last few days have been, it simply doesn't compare to having to flee your home from persecution or war to seek refuge in a land far away. It's heartwarming to have seen the empathy towards their plight from so many of you. What's your reaction to that? Do you think good for Gary for being so humble and seeing the bigger picture? Or do you think, what an obnoxious prat?
I think for that, I think very much the latter. I think it is the reason why the impartiality is so crucial fundamentally is that it is so easy to start saying my opinions are steeped in the milk of human kindness and therefore can only be viewed as utterly right, even though they're impartial, it's right. So I believe these migrants coming over illegally and risking their lives must all be good people at terrible risk, and anybody who thinks they shouldn't come over illegally is a Nazi. And so you move the halfway line in the debate, if it's a big football pitch, in the debate on what's impartial and what's not, you move it incrementally a few inches towards, I suppose, the lib outlook at the cost of everyone else. And the gains that are made in the cultural war are never given back. And I think that's a really good example of it.
What do you mean by that, the gains in the cultural war are never given back?
So I think this is what we're seeing. So I think about when I started in journalism, I started at Reuters, and we used to argue, everyone in the newsroom used to argue, if somebody blew up a bus full of children, and somebody would write the story saying terrorist blows up bus full of children, and other people say, well, no, it's not. He's not a terrorist. He's a terrorist depending on your viewpoint. To other people, he's a freedom fighter. And so there was so that's how seriously they took this sort of impartiality. And I think Reuters now capitalises the word black out of respect, even though it makes no grammatical sense. They capitalise it out of respect, some sort of politically correct respect to the oppression and subjugation black people have gone through over the years. So it's a sort of example of the woke mindset taking over what is meant to be a totally impartial news organisation, much like the BBC. And that is an incremental gain in the culture war. It's a taking of land that can never be given back, because to then decapitalise the word black is to say, well, what it's a huge argument.
Yes.
And I think this is exactly what's happening with Lineker, this row. It's not really about Lineker. It's about trying to move where the line of impartiality is and whether we need to be impartial anymore. And I think as soon as you've lost that, you've lost the essence of the BBC and everything it stands for, and everything will crumble quite quickly after that.
So because people now know, everybody now knows, that Gary Lineker, who presents Match of the Day, thinks that the government's position on boats and the language it uses is reminiscent of the 1930s, to use the exact. He didn't use the word Nazi, did he?
Okay.
But because everybody now knows that, people think that that's the right opinion, you're saying?
No, I think it's bigger than that. I think it's just saying we don't need to bother with impartiality anymore. And as soon as the fact is that, what he said, with the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Yeah. So Gary Lineker is probably a lovely guy, despite, and thinks he's doing a lovely thing. And he thinks these poor people, there are terrible things happening to them. But of course, it's a much, much more complex argument. And there are a lot of people that would say his opinion is 100% wrong, and that it's enabling people smuggling, and women and children who are trapped in the rubble in Ukraine and would like to get asylum in the UK are getting, put to the back of the queue because all these illegal Albanians are coming over. Whatever. The ins and outs of it aren't that important. What I think is that impartiality is there to prevent people, through the best of intentions, getting things wrong.
But do you think, just in terms of public perceptions, whatever, about the debate, I mean, I'd say that while Lineker has won the right to tweet whatever he wants, I think most people have come down on the side of thinking that actually comparing this government to the Nazis about this difficult moral question of what we do about the boats, I'd say most people have come down on the side of the government, in the sense that they don't agree that Lineker should have said that. They think he should have the right to say it, but they don't agree he should have said it. So in a sense, sunlight is the best disinfectant, and having had this public conversation,
well, I don't know,
hasn't really mattered.
But I suppose to take that on, you would say, so they're now talking about having a review of BBC's use of social media, BBC employees. So just say all BBC employees are allowed to tweet whatever they like, or maybe ones that don't work in news, but work in DJs or presenters elsewhere. I suppose what we will see, if they do all just start tweeting their genuine political beliefs, is the uniformity of belief and their political attitudes. And maybe that will bring about some change. But it is fundamentally very dull to hear people's political opinions.
Yes.
If maybe certain I listen to Zoe Ball in the mornings. If I find out that she's an ardent, it's highly unlikely, but say she thought that it was absolutely burning imperative that Boris Johnson was reinstated as Prime Minister, and she tweeted that every day.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't want to hear that from her. I want to...
Or that climate change wasn't happening.
Yeah, anything like that. You're like, there's a time and a place for that. It's not... these platforms they've got are the result. They're social media. There's no two ways around it. There's no way around it. The social media platforms are the result of their BBC positions. The BBC positions are paid for by us, and therefore I don't think they should be used for matters of impartiality.
Will you be tuning in to Match of the Day on Saturday night?
Probably not. I don't know. Not unless Fulham do something amazing.
It was actually a particularly weak set of highlights, I thought, generally.
Right.
It was it's impressive that they got 2.58 million because there weren't any particularly impressive games.
Well, it'd be quite interesting to see how long people got to the end. I imagine people just tuned in at the start to see
what it was
Lineker
like.
Wasn't there.
Do you think, lastly, Damien, do you think the problem might be that we don't really want to hear from footballers and ex-footballers about politics because they don't actually have I know Gary Linekers runs the Rest is History podcast. He owns the company that runs it. But I don't think he's a renowned scholar of the Third Reich. So I don't think he should be pronouncing about whether this is language that's reminiscent of Germany in the 1930s, because I don't think he knows. And I think increasingly we see it with Gary Neville on Sky. He talks a lot about Boris Johnson and the Tories. Footballers are just increasingly feel they can get involved in politics, and actually generally people don't want to hear about it from them.
It is a really weird cultural phenomenon that we have these footballers, particularly named Gary, I think, Gary Neville and Gary Lineker, who are looked upon increasingly by large swathes of the society as the voice of kindness and moderation. And
a lot of people think Gary Neville was going to get involved in politics.
I think Gary Neville is a in word and deed is a natural Tory. I think he's too thick to realise it. He claims himself a socialist. He doesn't behave like a socialist. But you get the culture you deserve. People get the culture you deserve, and maybe we do deserve to have former footballers as the sages of our time politically.
That's it for the View from 22 this week. Thank you very much for watching. Before you go, I'd like to remind you that football is a very simple game in which 22 men chase a political football around the pitch, and in the end, Gary Lineker and his mates always win. Thank you.